right, Subsequent 25 by Moog, beautiful analog synthesizer, fairly affordable. I picked one of these up recently when I was watching a video on the Midlife Synthesists, one of my favorite channels, and he was talking about how much he loved this synthesizer. I highly recommend you check out his channel as well. In this video, what I want to do is a basic walkthrough of analog synthesis, but specifically on the Sub 25 for anybody who's just picked it up or is thinking about picking it up. We're going to go over all the basic controls. There's a whole bunch of hidden features that you can access via the software. I'm not going to go into those in this video. This is just going to be how to use the basic controls to shape sounds and really get that ability to hear something in your head and be able to translate that into a synthesizer sound by adjusting the parameters and knowing which ones to adjust. So that little song you heard there was all Moog Sub 25 sounds. Some of them I took from the latest Lisa Belladonna library patches that just came out, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, and sampled, recorded them into Machine in some way or another. Either I recorded just the drum sound, or in some cases what I did is I recorded one note with the envelope and everything of a sound, like this one. And then other patches where I was able to record one sound and then play chords with them, which you can't do with this device. Really, you can play two notes at a time, but in this case, I've taken my Moog Sub 25 and I've kind of made it polyphonic. That's my Machine song. I've got lots of videos on sampling hardware synths with Machine. I'll put some links in the description for that. But let's get into the Subsequent 25 parameters. And what I'd recommend you do is either take notes or grab a synthesizer of your own, whether it's the Sub 25 or some kind of software equivalent, and follow along. Let's get right into it. Next thing I should mention is that the Subsequent 25 comes with the Subsequent 25 editor. And I've got a recent video where I showed using the software, this Subsequent 25 editor, and using this Expressive E controller with the Moog Sub 25 to control parameters. So I'll put a link to that in the description as well. This software is your librarian for patches. So you can click the librarian button right there. We'll also look at the software for a couple of these little extra hidden features. So if I click this little drop down right here, you can see these hidden features, and we have ways of accessing those via key presses and keys on the Sub 25 without the software. Over on the left hand side, you can see that we've got 16 different patches. Patch 1, 2, patch 1, 3, and over on the librarian software, this is where you could go and double click on a patch, drag a patch right over. Now we're on a totally different patch over here on patch 1, 3. And if I go to patch 1, 2, you can see that we go back to that one, and now I go to patch. So if you go and make a whole bunch of changes and you want to save a patch on this device, all you have to do is hold the bank button, hold the patch button for a few seconds. You'll see it flash a few times. And now we can see that we've saved that patch. If I go back to 1, 3, okay, so the next is this Activate Panel button. If I click the Activate Panel button, I go from my presets to exactly what you see on this device. So wherever any of these knobs are, when you press the Activate Panel button, now that's what you're going to get. And we can see over on the software that the software has reset to show us exactly what we're getting with this patch as well. So don't forget about that button whenever you just want to start creating your own patch. So let's go through these different buttons. First one is fine tune. Obviously that's just going to set your master tuning for your synthesizer patch. Glide rate is the time it takes to get from one note to the next. So if I crank this up, so that's glide rate or portamento. And here we have the octave buttons. And I think with the modulation section, we'll come back to this section because we need to have a little bit of an understanding of things like filter and pitch and waveform in order to make sense of this area. Most important part of the synthesizer are the oscillators, and analog synthesizers have analog oscillators in them. And these are the things that are creating the basic raw waveform. So if we look at this oscillator 1, I'm going to go to my mixer, make sure oscillator 2 is all the way off. And with oscillator 1, we're going to put that right at 12 o'clock. Talk about why in a second. But oscillator 1, now we can see we've got 16 feet, 8 feet, 4 feet, and 2 feet. And what this refers to is, I guess when they were making the first synthesizers, they referred to an octave in feet because the old pipe organs, if you took a 16-foot section of pipe and then cut it in half, you would increase the frequency by an octave. And so that's what we've got here. Next thing we've got is a hard sync button, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then below that, we've got the actual wave selector. So what I'm going to do next for this oscillator is I'm going to crank the filter all the way open, because with the filter all the way to the right, we're basically allowing all the frequencies through. So we can really hear the richness of harmonics coming from this oscillator, this main oscillator right here. So if I start with a triangle wave, we've got a fairly simple tone in comparison to the rest of them, but it still does have harmonics. We don't have a pure sine wave generator on here, but we can approximate it with some tricks that we can get into in a separate video. But here we've got the triangle. We go up to the saw wave, which is a much brighter, brassier kind of sound. Then we get into a square wave, where we start strengthening the odd harmonics of this tone. And then all the way up to a pulse wave, which has even stronger odd harmonics. A little bit more nasally sounding. And then once we use that in conjunction with the filter, that's how we start shaping our sounds, and that's why this is called subtractive synthesis, because we're taking a rich tone and then we are removing frequencies. We're subtracting frequencies, or we're subtracting those harmonics from that sound. So let's put it to a saw wave for now. Let's take this down an octave. Let's go look at oscillator 2. So we can't really talk about oscillator 2 without looking at the mixer section, and that is, of course, where we raise the ratio of oscillators in this device. So we've got one oscillator for our main oscillator. We've got a sub-oscillator, which adds a square wave an octave below oscillator 1. So, and by the way, according to the manual, if you set your knobs at 6, or at 12 o'clock there, that's going to be what's called unity gain for the oscillators. And what that means is you're not going to get any internal distortion from the setting there. And if you crank it beyond that, you're actually going to start overdriving the signal a little bit, but in a good way, because this is an analog synthesizer. So you can take it beyond that and start to get a little bit dirtier sound, but we'll just leave it at 6 for now. There's the sub-oscillator. And then oscillator 2, of course, we've got that one right here, which we will now hear whatever's happening on this one. And then we've got a noise generator as well, which is great for making percussive sounds and stuff like that. So let's go look at oscillator 2 now. So if I've got my oscillator 2 at 12 o'clock, now, of course, we can do the same thing. We can choose whatever wave we want to have going along with oscillator 1. Great thing about oscillator 2 is that you can use your octave settings, but then we can also go and use the frequency settings. And it says -7 to +7, and that just means semitones. So if I take this and crank it all the way up, the oscillator 2 is a perfect fifth above oscillator 1. We can then go use the mixer. And if we put it to the same waveform, it's kind of like we're adding harmonics now. Take it up an octave. And we're making a much richer sound. So that's a way to use two oscillators to enhance the harmonics of the first oscillator. And then, of course, we can also tune this second oscillator to something other than a fifth. A major third, put it back to 12 o'clock. Both oscillators are playing the same frequency. So we're going to get some phasing happening if we, adjust this just a tiny bit. So just by detuning it, we can create this bigger sound with the second oscillator on the same waveform. So another thing we can do with the second oscillator is use this hard sync. And the way hard sync works is when you have a frequency that's going up and down, and you have another frequency that's also going at the same time, and if we go and create two different waveforms here and listen to them, and change the frequency. So right now we have two different tones, but their wavelength is not matching up. So that's why we're hearing two pitches at the same time. So the way hard sync works is you've got one oscillator that's moving up and down, and you've got another oscillator that might be doing something different. But if that oscillator is reset at the end of the first oscillator's cycle, then the pitch is going to stay the same. In other words, we're going to hear it as one note, but we're going to get this really bizarre waveform that's being created because of those two waves working together, but you're going to end up with something in tune. So watch what happens here. I press hard sync, and now we're back to a C, but it's a much richer tone. The coolest part about this, of course, is if you take your hard sync and you start cranking up the frequency of the second oscillator. And with the filter section, we'll keep it simple, but we've got the classic Moog ladder filter. It's a low pass filter, so we're cutting the high frequencies. So if you have it all the way to the right, it's not doing anything. And if you start cranking it to the left, you will be filtering out those high frequencies, those harmonics, until you get right down into the fundamental frequency. And if you go all the way to the left, you'll just cut everything until there's no sound at all. You've got a cutoff point. So we go down to 1.2 kilohertz. And with resonance, if I raise that up, wherever the cutoff is, so if the filter is filtering out the frequencies, resonance is going to boost right before the drop off. And it just gets kind of a nasal sound. And it makes the filter much more dramatic. So if your filter changes just aren't aggressive enough and you want them to be more dramatic, try boosting the resonance and then work with your filter and see if that's making the difference that you're looking for. And you can think of multi-drive, the next one, as Moog's own distortion. So if we crank this up, getting much more aggressive, powerful tones out of your filter. I love this multi-drive, and it definitely has a Moog sound. Basically, when you hear about people talking about Moog synthesizers, this is what a lot of people will tell you you're buying, is the filter section. The coolest part about the synth is that you can actually plug external audio into it and use the filter section on other synthesizers. And then underneath that, we've got something called keyboard amount. So if I turn the keyboard amount all the way to 0, and then crank it all the way up, as you go up the keyboard, it's going to keep opening the filter so that the high frequencies are exaggerated a little bit more. And basically, it's just darker tones at the bottom of the keyboard, brighter tones at the higher part of the keyboard. So set that at 1:1 if you want a more subtle effect. And then 0. So that's keyboard amount, and then next we've got EG amount, and that stands for envelope generator amount, attached to this next section, which is our envelopes. Envelopes have 4 stages, and we've got attack, decay, sustain, and release. Attack determines how long does it take for the sound to get to its maximum level. We're going to have another level called sustain here in a second, which we can bring the level down to, but the attack is going to be that initial loudness. So wherever your mixer setting is for oscillator 1, let's turn off oscillator 2. So we'll put it up to 8, and this attack determines how long it takes to get to that level 8. It starts by milliseconds, so we got 1 millisecond. Now we're at a second, or immediate. Next, we have decay, and the decay is dependent on the sustain level. A hard concept to grasp at first, but if we look at the sustain, if we have it set all the way to 10, this decay isn't going to do anything because the attack is taking us to the maximum level, and if our sustain level is set at the maximum level, it's going to stay at the same level as whatever our oscillator 1 is set at. If I bring this down, what that's going to do now is it's going to go up to the maximum level with the attack, and then decay is going to determine how long it falls down to that sustain level. So let's set that a little bit longer. And then let's set our sustain level really low. And let's set our attack and our decay to about the same amount now. So it's going to go up and then down to the sustain level. Let's set them a little bit longer. Or go up a little longer and then quickly down to the sustain level. Let's open up the filter a bit. And let's go really quickly to the sustain level. So, boom, and then it drops off. So that's attack and decay and sustain. Now remember, if your sustain level is set to maximum, this decay isn't going to do anything. Okay, so we get our head around that one, and then of course release. What happens when you let go of the key? So that's our release value. So next thing we'll look at is a filter envelope, and the thing you have to understand is you can do all the things you want to this. If this EG amount is set at 0, it's not going to do anything. So this is the way it works. We crank up the EG amount, and the EG amount is going to be kind of like our oscillator volume when we were talking about the amplifier envelope. So if our EG amount is set to, say, 3 o'clock here, what this is going to do is it's going to push our filter cutoff even farther past this point. And we'll hear that if I play a note now. Now if I turn EG amount all the way off, that's where our filter is set at right now, at 1.2 kilohertz. If I crank up the EG amount, it's going to be using this envelope as a way to play with the filter cutoff. So it's kind of like going like this. And then when you release the note, how quickly does it go back to 1.2 kilohertz? So remember, any of these things like an envelope or an LFO, they're ways to control certain parameters. So if we want that synth to be going every time we play a note, we're going to use this envelope generator to do exactly that. So I'm going to crank this up now, and we're going to set our sustain level all the way to 10. So it's going to push it really intensely to the right. And then the way this sustain works is we could have our attack go all the way up to whatever our EG amount is. So remember, attack is kind of tied to this EG amount, just like attack here is tied to this oscillator 1 mixer amount, as in taking us to the maximum setting of whatever this is. Well, that's what attack's doing here. How quickly is your filter going to raise the cutoff to the maximum amount determined by this EG amount? And then sustain level is going to be a way that we can have it go up to the maximum filter cutoff, so pushed all the way to the right, and then it's going to back it off down to whatever our sustain level is. So all the way up to whatever EG amount is with the attack, and then down by the time value of decay to whatever our sustain level is at. So it's kind of like going like this. Let's turn the EG off again. It's like going. Right? So what if I set my sustain level a little bit higher? It's like, if I crank it all the way up, it's like putting my sustain level way up here. So now let's crank that up. And if I have my sustain level cranked all the way, just like we had down in the amplifier, this decay doesn't matter anymore because our attack takes us up to that filter cutoff amount and leaves it there. You could even set your sustain all the way down. And now the release doesn't really matter because it's already, the filter cutoff's already returned back to 1.2 kilohertz. So it's kind of like going like this. But if we crank the envelope generator up and we set our sustain to, let's set our sustain to 12 o'clock, and we'll set our release to, a fairly long release. Now we also need a long release on our amplifier so that we can hear the filter closing back down. So you can hear it closing. Let's go a little faster. Here it's closing even though the note is still sustaining. So that is our filter envelope controls. And remember I said I wanted to be able to go wow, 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 like this. Let's see if we can approximate this. So let's set it a little bit lower. So with this EG amount all the way up, let's crank the attack all the way for a sec. So that's how far our filter cutoff is going to go. If we crank the attack all the way to the left, it's taking us all the way up to the highest level. Let's go even farther. And then let's control this, bring this down a bit. Without it, it's like going like about up to there. So I crank that all the way up. Now we're going to spend a little bit longer to get to that filter opening state. There it is. And then what I can do if I want the filter to open really wide just for a moment, close down, still at a higher level, I use my sustain level. We can make this even more dramatic, of course. Let's raise the resonance. So as the filter is moving, it's a little bit more obvious. And we'll crank up the multi-drive as well. So one more thing to note with this EG amount. So right now, if you have it cranked to the right, it's like taking this cutoff knob and pushing it to the right. If you turn it into the negative, that moves the cutoff the opposite direction. So instead of the cutoff doing this with the envelope, now what the cutoff's going to do is it's going to go this way. Wow, wow. And it's not going to be as dramatic. So let's listen to this sound. Watch what happens if I take the EG amount and put it to the left. It's pushing the cutoff knob all the way down to 20 Hertz, so we're not really hearing anything. So let's crank this up so we can hear the effect a little bit better. And it's going to be like going like this. So we'll crank it to the left. So I take the attack and raise it up a bit. And let's take our sustain level and push it up. So you can see by playing with the envelope settings and this EG amount in a negative direction, you can really get some interesting results as well. But again, just think of it in your head as if the control is going like this now. So let's go and look at the last section we've got to talk about today, which is the modulation section. And with the modulation section, all this is going to do is going to tie some controls to the modulation wheel. And as you turn this up, there is something called a low frequency oscillator that is going to cause a fluctuation of some parameter. So let's say you thought it might be neat to start messing with this frequency control of hard sync. If I crank up oscillator 2, and you think, boy, that may be kind of neat to have that control move back and forth for me in a rhythmic way. Well, that's what an LFO is designed to do. All it is designed to do is pulse in some way, whether it's on, off as a square wave, which we've got right here, or up and down as a triangle, or up and down as a sawtooth wave. So we've got it jumps up and then drops off, and jumps up and drops off, or a ramp where it slowly moves up and then drops off, and slowly moves up and drops off. Or we've also got sample and hold, which is just kind of like a random thing. And then we've also got filter envelope generator, so we can actually use our LFO can use these controls right here. The most obvious thing to show what an LFO is doing is if I crank up the pitch amount. So watch what happens if I crank up the pitch amount. If I don't do anything with the mod wheel, we don't hear anything. But if I crank this up, then we are controlling the pitch. And if I go from a triangle wave to a square wave, or a sawtooth wave, or ramp, sample and hold random. And if we crank up the rate, That's LFO for you. And we can just hear this thing that's pulsing and causing a change in the pitch. If I take the pitch all the way off and go to filter amount, now what we are doing is we're affecting the filter cutoff. So it's still allowing our envelope thing to happen because we've got envelope generator amount turned up. But now what we're getting is a pulsing change in the filter cutoff. Kind of like going, but doing it in a perfect way, right? That's all it's doing. Let me turn this off. Now let's turn it back up. Same thing. And then of course we can change the rate. And have it take a really long time or be something that happens really quickly. And then with the software, we can actually sync this to the tempo of projects. So that's where things get really cool, because you can then have your changes happening in time with the music of your project. And then wave amount. Turn this off, and now it's like going like this. Turning that knob back and forth. So let's turn that one off. And then now what we're going to do is going to pitch amount to oscillator 2 only. And so that's going to be the same thing as going to this frequency control right here and doing. So let's go and take that, crank that up. And then we're going to go to pitch to oscillator 2. Here we go. Crank that up, turn these off. So you can hear that change as if we're cranking that in real time. So you can hear all these amazing ways that we can change these sounds. And all of these controls have been around for a very long time on old synthesizer devices. But just understanding how they work on this specific device is key, and you have to sit there and play with these things over and over again to really let them sink in and start to become something immediate for you when you're playing around with your synthesizers. So that pretty much does it for the basic controls of this device. I'm scratching the surface still of this synthesizer because there's a whole bunch of things that we can do aside from these things, but that's more than enough to get you started. So highly recommend this synthesizer. It sounds beautiful and definitely a worthwhile investment.